The gunshot that missed Josephine Zeller's head by mere inches was the sound that finally broke her. She stood frozen in the dusty street of Lincoln, New Mexico territory, watching the two men who had been arguing over a card game now rolling in the dirt, fists flying, completely unaware that their stray bullet had nearly ended her life. The year was 1878, and Josephine had been wandering from town to town for 3 months now, ever since her father died of consumption and left her alone in a world that had no use for a 20-year-old woman with no family, no money, and no prospects. The near miss should have terrified her, should have sent her running for cover like the other townsfolk who scattered like tumbleweeds in a storm. Instead, she felt nothing but a hollow emptiness that had become her constant companion. Her dark blonde hair hung limp beneath her worn bonnet, her blue cotton dress was covered in trail dust, and her feet ached in boots that were starting to come apart at the seams. She had spent her last coins on a meal 2 days ago, and her stomach cramped with hunger. Josephine had no destination, no plan, no hope. She was simply existing, moving from one moment to the next without purpose or direction. "Miss, you all right?" The voice came from behind her, deep and concerned with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas origins. Josephine turned slowly, expecting to see another curious onlooker, perhaps someone who would offer empty sympathy before moving on with their day. Instead, she found herself looking up into the weathered face of a man who appeared to be in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and eyes that were such a striking shade of gray they reminded her of storm clouds gathering on the horizon. "That bullet came mighty close," he continued, his expression genuinely troubled. "You look like you have seen a ghost." "I am fine," Josephine heard herself say, though her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "Thank you for your concern." She started to walk away, heading nowhere in particular, just moving because standing still felt like admitting defeat. But the man fell into step beside her, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each stride. "Name is Xavier Hawthorne," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "I have been watching you for the past hour, and I do not mean that in any improper way. It is just that you have been standing in the middle of the street, barely moving, and you look like someone who is carrying the weight of the whole world." Josephine stopped walking and turned to face him properly. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes that spoke of long days under the sun, and the way his shirt, though clean, had been mended several times. He was not a wealthy man, but there was something solid about him, something steady that made her tired soul want to lean in his direction. "I suppose I was lost in thought," she admitted, not sure why she was being honest with this stranger. Perhaps it was because she had nothing left to lose, not even her pride. "Lost in thought, or just lost?" Xavier asked gently. "Because if you do not mind me saying so, you look like someone who does not know which way to turn." Tears pricked at Josephine's eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She had not cried since her father's funeral, had not allowed herself that luxury because once she started, she feared she would never stop. But something about this man's kindness, the genuine care in his gray eyes, threatened to crack the careful walls she had built around her heart. "I have no direction," she whispered, the admission costing her more than she expected. "My father died 3 months ago. He was all the family I had. We were heading west, hoping to start fresh in California, but he got sick in Kansas. By the time we made it to Santa Fe, he could barely breathe. The doctor said it was consumption, and there was nothing to be done. He died 2 weeks later, and I have been wandering ever since. I have no money, no family, no home to return to. I do not know where to go or what to do." Xavier listened without interrupting, his expression growing more solemn as she spoke. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the mountains that rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow despite the warmth of late spring. "Then let me be your North Star," he said finally, turning back to her with such intensity that Josephine felt her breath catch. "Follow me home." "Home," she repeated, certain she had misheard. "I have a ranch about 10 miles north of here," Xavier explained. "It is not much, just a small spread with cattle and horses, but it is mine. Well, mine and the bank's for another few years. My mother lives with me. She has been after me to hire help around the house because she cannot manage everything on her own anymore, not with her arthritis. I know this is sudden, and you do not know me from Adam, but I am offering you honest work, a roof over your head and 3 meals a day. No strings attached, no expectations beyond helping with the household chores and maybe tending the garden. You would have your own room, and my mother would be there as a chaperone, so everything would be proper and respectable." Josephine stared at him, waiting for the catch, for the sinister undertone that surely had to be lurking beneath such a generous offer. But Xavier just looked back at her with those steady gray eyes, patient and calm, like a man who had all the time in the world to wait for her answer. "Why would you help me?" she asked suspiciously. "You do not know anything about me. I could be a thief or a liar or worse." A small smile tugged at the corner of Xavier's mouth. "Could be," he agreed. "But I have always been a pretty good judge of character, and what I see is someone who is honest, hardworking, and desperately in need of a break. My mother always taught me that we are put on this earth to help each other, and right now, you need help. It is as simple as that." Nothing in Josephine's life had ever been simple, but as she looked into Xavier's face and saw nothing but sincerity, she felt something shift inside her chest. Hope, fragile as a newborn bird, began to flutter its wings. "I do not know what to say," she admitted. "Say yes," Xavier replied. "Come out to the ranch, meet my mother, see if it suits you. If you do not like it, I will bring you back to town, no hard feelings. But at least give yourself a chance at something better than wandering these streets with no direction." Josephine thought about the long, lonely nights she had spent sleeping in barns or under the stars, always cold, always afraid, always alone. She thought about the hunger that gnawed at her belly and the exhaustion that had seeped into her very bones. And she thought about this stranger who was offering her a lifeline when he had no reason to do so beyond simple human kindness. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I will come with you." The relief that washed over Xavier's face was so genuine that Josephine felt her own tension ease slightly. He was not a predator who had successfully lured in his prey. He was simply a good man trying to do a good deed. "I have some business to finish up in town," Xavier said. "I need to pick up supplies at the general store and talk to the blacksmith about some new horseshoes. Why do not you come with me, and I will buy you a proper meal first? You look like you have not eaten in days." "I could not accept that," Josephine protested weakly, though her stomach betrayed her by growling loudly at the mention of food. Xavier's expression turned stern. "Miss Zeller, if you are going to be working for me, you are going to have to learn to accept help when it is offered. Now come on, there is a decent restaurant just down the street that makes a pot roast that will restore your faith in humanity." He offered her his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Josephine took it. The simple act of linking arms with another person, of having that human connection, made her throat tight with emotion. She had been so alone for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone beside her, supporting her, caring whether she ate or not. The restaurant was small but clean, with checkered tablecloths and the wonderful smell of home cooking filling the air. Xavier guided her to a table by the window and ordered pot roast for both of them, along with fresh bread and coffee. When the food arrived, Josephine had to force herself not to fall on it like a starving animal. She tried to eat slowly, to maintain some semblance of dignity, but Xavier seemed to understand her struggle and kept up a steady stream of conversation that allowed her to focus on her plate without feeling self-conscious. He told her about his ranch, about how his father had homesteaded the land 20 years ago and built it up from nothing. His father had died 5 years back when a horse threw him and he broke his neck, leaving Xavier to run the ranch at age 20. It had been hard, he admitted, learning to manage everything on his own while also taking care of his mother, but they had survived and even managed to prosper modestly. "We run about 200 head of cattle," Xavier explained, "and I breed horses on the side. Good ranch horses, mostly sturdy animals that can handle the rough terrain. I have 2 men who work for me, Tom and Miguel. They are good fellows, honest and hardworking. Tom is older, maybe 50, been a cowhand his whole life. Miguel is younger, came up from Mexico looking for work about 3 years ago. They bunk in the barn, but they take most of their meals with us at the main house." Josephine nodded, soaking up the information while also marveling at the delicious food. The pot roast was tender and flavorful, the vegetables perfectly cooked, and the bread was still warm from the oven. She could not remember the last time she had eaten anything this good. "Tell me about yourself," Xavier said after a while. "Where are you from originally?" "Missouri," Josephine replied, wiping her mouth with her napkin. "A small town outside of St. Louis. My mother died when I was born, so it was just my father and me my whole life. He was a carpenter, a good one, but work got scarce and he kept hearing about opportunities out west. We sold everything we had and bought a wagon and supplies. We were going to go to California, maybe San Francisco. My father thought he could find work there building houses for all the people still flocking to the goldfields." "I am sorry for your loss," Xavier said quietly. "Losing a parent is never easy, especially when they are all you have." "He was a good man," Josephine said, her voice catching slightly. "Kind and patient. He taught me to read and write, made sure I had an education even though we did not have much money. He always said that knowledge was the one thing nobody could take from you." Sounds like he was wise as well as kind. They finished their meal in companionable silence, and then Xavier paid the bill and led her to the general store. It was a large establishment, crammed with everything from sacks of flour to horse tack to bolts of fabric. Xavier moved through the aisles efficiently, gathering the supplies he needed while also pausing at the clothing section. "Pick out a couple of dresses," he told Josephine. "Work dresses, something practical, and you need new boots. Those look like they are about to fall apart." "I cannot let you buy me clothes," Josephine protested, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Xavier turned to look at her, his expression patient but firm. "Miss Zeller, you cannot work on a ranch in boots that have holes in them. Consider it part of your employment like a uniform. And before you argue further, I am going to step over to the hardware section, and when I come back, I expect to see you with at least 2 dresses and a new pair of boots." He walked away before she could protest further, leaving Josephine standing among the ready-made dresses feeling overwhelmed. She was not used to accepting charity, but Xavier had a way of framing things that made it feel less like charity and more like simple practicality. With shaking hands, she selected 2 sturdy cotton dresses, one in brown and one in dark blue, both designed for hard work with long sleeves and high collars. Then she found a pair of boots that actually fit her properly, with thick soles and good stitching that would last for years. When Xavier returned, he also had a wide-brimmed hat and a warm shawl that he added to her pile without comment. He paid for everything along with his ranch supplies, and soon they were loading everything into a sturdy wagon hitched to two patient draft horses. The ride out to the ranch took about an hour, following a well-worn road that curved through scrubland dotted with juniper and piñon trees. The mountains rose majestically on either side, and Josephine could see cattle grazing in the distance, small dark shapes against the golden grass. The air was clear and clean, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers, and for the first time in months, Josephine felt like she could breathe properly. Xavier kept up a running commentary as they drove, pointing out landmarks and telling her stories about the area. He had an easy way of talking that required no response, which Josephine appreciated because she was too busy taking in her surroundings and trying to process the rapid turn her life had taken. Just a few hours ago, she had been standing in the street with no hope and no future. Now she was sitting beside a kind stranger who was offering her work and shelter, heading towards something that might actually resemble a home. The ranch came into view as they crested a small rise, and Josephine caught her breath at the sight. It was indeed modest, as Xavier had said, but there was something appealing about the way the buildings were laid out. The main house was a single-story structure made of adobe with a wide porch running along the front. The barn was large and well-maintained, painted red with white trim, and she could see a corral beyond it where several horses grazed peacefully. There were a few outbuildings as well, probably a smokehouse and root cellar, and off to one side was a garden plot that showed signs of recent tending. "Home sweet home," Xavier said, pulling the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "It is not fancy, but it is solid and it keeps out the weather." Before Josephine could respond, the front door opened and a woman emerged onto the porch. She was perhaps in her late 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a neat bun and the same gray eyes as her son. She wore a simple dress with an apron tied over it, and her face, though lined with age and hardship, held a warmth that immediately put Josephine at ease. "Xavier, you are back," the woman called out. "And you have brought a guest." Xavier hopped down from the wagon and then came around to help Josephine down, his hands steady and respectful as he guided her to the ground. "Ma, this is Miss Josephine Zeller." "Miss Zeller, this is my mother, Constance Hawthorne." Constance came down the porch steps, moving a bit stiffly but with determination, and looked Josephine up and down with sharp, assessing eyes. Josephine stood still under the scrutiny, knowing she must look like something the cat dragged in with her dusty dress and exhausted face. "You look like you have had a hard time of it, dear," Constance said finally, her voice gentle. "Come inside and let me get you some tea. Xavier, bring in the supplies and Miss Zeller's things. She can have the room at the back, the one that gets the morning sun." Just like that, the decision was made. Josephine followed Constance into the house, blinking as her eyes adjusted to the dimmer interior. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall and a sturdy wooden table surrounded by chairs in the center. Everything was clean and well kept, with colorful rag rugs on the floor and curtains at the windows that looked hand-sewn. It was the kind of home that spoke of care and attention, of people who took pride in their surroundings. "Sit, sit," Constance urged, gesturing to a chair at the table. She moved to the stove where a kettle was already heating and began preparing tea. "Xavier told you about the position." "He said you needed help around the house," Josephine said carefully, "and that you would provide room and board in exchange for work." "That is right," Constance confirmed, setting out cups and saucers. "My hands are not what they used to be. The arthritis makes it hard to do all the cooking and cleaning and laundry, and that garden is more than I can manage on my own, though I do try. Xavier does what he can, but running a ranch keeps him busy from sunup to sundown. We need someone young and strong who can handle the household tasks." Xavier came in carrying Josephine's new clothes and the parcels from the general store. He set the clothes in her arms and began unloading the supplies onto the table. "I will show you to your room," he said to Josephine. "Ma, we will be right back." The room Xavier led her to was small but comfortable, with a single bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, a small dresser, and a window that looked out over the garden and toward the mountains beyond. It was the nicest room Josephine had seen in months, maybe years, and she felt tears sting her eyes again at the simple kindness of being given a private space. "There is water in the pitcher if you want to wash up," Xavier said, setting her bundles on the bed. "Privy is out back, about 20 yards from the house. Supper is usually around 6, but Ma will probably have something ready earlier today since you are here. Take your time settling in and come out when you are ready." He left, closing the door softly behind him, and Josephine stood in the middle of her new room feeling overwhelmed. She walked to the window and looked out at the view, watching clouds drift across the sky and listening to the sound of birds singing in the nearby trees. Then she poured water into the basin and washed her face and hands, marveling at the luxury of clean water and a proper towel. She changed into one of her new dresses, the brown one, and put on her new boots, which felt strange after so long in her worn-out pair. She brushed out her hair as best she could and repinned it, trying to look presentable and respectable. When she emerged from her room, she found Constance at the stove and Xavier sitting at the table going through some paperwork. They both looked up when she entered, and Josephine saw approval in Constance's eyes. "Much better," the older woman said. "You clean up nicely, dear. Now come help me with this stew. We will have an early supper tonight so you can get to bed at a decent hour. You look like you could sleep for a week." The evening passed in a pleasant blur. Josephine helped Constance finish preparing the meal, learning the layout of the kitchen and where things were stored. The two ranch hands, Tom and Miguel, came in for supper, and they greeted Josephine with friendly nods and tipped hats. Tom was a weathered man with a white beard and kind eyes, while Miguel was younger, maybe 30, with a ready smile and excellent manners. They ate together around the big table, and the conversation flowed easily. Tom told a funny story about a stubborn calf that had gotten loose that morning, and Miguel talked about the new foal that one of the mares had delivered the previous week. Xavier discussed plans for moving the cattle to summer pasture, and Constance asked Josephine questions about her journey west, gentle inquiries that did not pry too deeply into painful subjects. By the time the meal ended and the dishes were washed, Josephine was swaying on her feet with exhaustion. Constance shooed her off to bed, telling her not to worry about helping with anything else tonight, that there would be plenty of work to do starting tomorrow. Josephine thanked them all and retreated to her little room, where she changed into the nightgown that Constance had laid out on the bed for her and crawled beneath the quilt. She expected to lie awake worrying about her new situation, questioning whether she had made the right decision to come here with strangers. Instead, she fell asleep almost immediately, lulled by the feeling of safety and the softness of the mattress beneath her tired body. The next morning, Josephine woke to golden sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of coffee brewing. For a moment, she was disoriented, unable to remember where she was. Then memory flooded back and she sat up, looking around her little room with wonder. It had not been a dream. She really was here, on Xavier's ranch, with a roof over her head and a purpose to her days. She dressed quickly in her other new dress, the blue one, and made her way to the kitchen where Constance was already working on breakfast. The older woman greeted her with a smile and immediately put her to work mixing biscuits while bacon sizzled in a pan on the stove. "The men will be in soon," Constance said. "They have already been up for 2 hours doing the morning chores. Ranching does not wait for the sun to rise, I am afraid. But once they have eaten, Xavier will take you around and show you how everything works here." True to her word, the men trooped in just as breakfast was ready, bringing with them the smell of hay and horses. They ate heartily, praising the fluffy biscuits that Josephine had made, which caused her to flush with pleasure at the compliment. Then Tom and Miguel headed back out to their work, while Xavier lingered to help clear the table, ready for the grand tour. He asked Josephine, his gray eyes twinkling with amusement. Josephine nodded, feeling nervous but also curious. Xavier led her outside and spent the next hour showing her around the ranch. He explained the daily routines, the feeding schedules for the animals, where everything was stored, and what needed to be done on a regular basis. He introduced her to the horses in the corral, including a gentle mare named Daisy that he said Josephine could ride if she wanted to learn. "Do you know how to ride?" Xavier asked. "A little," Josephine admitted. "My father taught me the basics, but we never had a horse of our own. We traveled with a wagon and oxen." "Well, Daisy would be perfect for you then. She is patient and steady, good for someone still learning." Out here, knowing how to ride is important. You never know when you might need to go for help or run an errand into town. As they walked, Xavier told her more about the ranch and his plans for its future. He wanted to expand the herd gradually, to improve the bloodlines of his horses, and maybe eventually to build a bigger house. He spoke with such passion and determination that Josephine found herself caught up in his vision, seeing the potential in everything he showed her. "Your father would be proud of what you have built here," she said impulsively. Xavier's expression grew solemn. "I hope so. He worked himself into an early grave establishing this place. The least I can do is make sure it thrives." They returned to the house where Constance had a long list of tasks that needed doing. Josephine threw herself into the work with enthusiasm, grateful to have something productive to focus on. She helped with the laundry, scrubbing clothes on a washboard and hanging them to dry in the warm breeze. She weeded the garden while Constance directed her on which plants were vegetables and which were weeds. She swept and mopped the floors, dusted the furniture, and helped prepare lunch for everyone. The work was hard, but it was honest work, and Josephine found satisfaction in it. More than that, she found herself relaxing in the presence of the Hawthornes. Constance was patient and encouraging, teaching her the way things were done without criticism or impatience. And Xavier, whenever he came in from his ranch work, always had a kind word or a smile for her, making her feel valued and appreciated. The days began to blend together in a pleasant rhythm. Josephine would rise early and help Constance prepare breakfast for the men. After they ate, she would tackle the household chores while Constance supervised and offered advice. In the afternoons, when the heat grew intense, they would sit on the porch and do mending or other handwork, while Constance told stories about the early days of the ranch and her life in Texas, before she married and moved to New Mexico. Josephine learned that Constance had been a schoolteacher before marriage, which explained her refined way of speaking and her obvious education. She learned that Xavier's father, William, had been a Texas Ranger before deciding to try his hand at ranching. She learned about the struggles of those early years, the droughts and the harsh winters, the threat of raids and wild animals. But she also learned about the joys, the satisfaction of building something lasting, the beauty of the land, and the strong community of neighbors who helped each other in times of need. In the evenings, after supper was finished and the dishes were washed, They would sit around the table and talk or sometimes play cards. Xavier taught Josephine to play poker, using dried beans as betting chips, and she discovered she had a decent poker face. Tom would tell tall tales about his years as a cowhand, embellishing the stories until they were all laughing. Miguel would sometimes take out a guitar and play songs from his homeland, his voice rich and melodious. These were the moments when Josephine felt the ice around her heart beginning to thaw. She had been so alone for so long, carrying her grief and fear like a heavy burden. But here, surrounded by good people who genuinely seemed to care about her well-being, she began to remember what it felt like to be part of something, to belong somewhere. She was especially aware of Xavier's presence. She found herself noticing little things about him, like the way his face lit up when he smiled, or the gentle way he handled the horses, or the respect with which he spoke to everyone regardless of their station. He was unfailingly kind to his mother, patient with his employees, and considerate toward Josephine in a way that made her feel valued without any improper undertones. About 2 weeks into her stay, Xavier asked if she would like to learn to ride properly. Josephine agreed eagerly, and he began giving her lessons on Daisy in the late afternoons when the work was done. He was a patient teacher, explaining things clearly and never making her feel foolish when she made mistakes. Gradually, Josephine's confidence grew, and she progressed from nervous walks around the corral to gentle trots across the open ground near the house. "You are a natural," Xavier told her one afternoon as she successfully guided Daisy through a figure-8 pattern. "Another few weeks, and you will be ready to ride out on the range with us." The praise made Josephine's heart flutter in a way that had nothing to do with the physical exertion of riding. She had begun to realize that her feelings for Xavier were evolving beyond gratitude into something deeper and more complicated. She found herself looking for him throughout the day, her spirits lifting when he came in for meals, her attention always drawn to wherever he was in a room. She told herself it was foolish, that she should not develop romantic feelings for her employer, but her heart refused to listen to logic. One evening, about a month after Josephine's arrival, a neighbor stopped by to invite them all to a barn dance the following Saturday. The neighbor, a friendly rancher named Mr. Peterson, said it would be a good opportunity for the community to get together and socialize before the busy summer season really got underway. "You will come, will you not?" Constance asked Josephine after Mr. Peterson had left. "It will be good for you to meet more people, and you have been working so hard. You deserve an evening of fun." "I do not know how to dance," Josephine admitted, feeling shy. "Nonsense, it is easy," Constance said. "Xavier can teach you. He is an excellent dancer. His father made sure of that." Xavier, who had been reading a newspaper by the fireplace, looked up with a grin. "Ma is determined to marry me off," he said to Josephine. "She thinks if she can just get me to enough social events, some nice girl will snatch me up." "I just want to see you happy," Constance replied with dignity. "And maybe give me some grandchildren before I am too old to enjoy them." Xavier shook his head in amused exasperation but stood up and held out his hand to Josephine. "Come on, let me teach you the basics. Ma, can you hum a waltz?" And so, in the main room of the ranch house with Constance humming a tune and clapping the rhythm, Xavier taught Josephine to dance. He was indeed a good dancer, moving with a grace that seemed at odds with his cowboy persona. He held her respectfully, his hand warm on her waist, his other hand gently clasping hers as he guided her through the steps. "Just follow my lead," he murmured, his face close to hers. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Do not look at your feet, look at me. Trust that your feet will know what to do." Josephine raised her eyes to his and felt her breath catch. This close, she could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes, could smell the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. His expression was focused and encouraging, but there was something else there too, something that made her heart race. They practiced for nearly an hour, with Constance occasionally offering pointers or changing to a different tune. By the end, Josephine felt fairly confident in the basic steps, though she knew she would never be as graceful as Xavier made it look. "You will be the belle of the ball," Xavier told her as they finally stopped, both slightly breathless from the exertion. "I doubt that," Josephine replied, "but at least I will not embarrass myself too badly." Saturday arrived with perfect weather, warm but not too hot, with a gentle breeze that kept the air fresh. Josephine wore her best dress, the one she had been saving, a green cotton that brought out her eyes. Constance helped her arrange her hair in a more elaborate style than her usual simple bun, weaving in some wildflowers that grew near the house. "You look beautiful," Constance said with satisfaction as she stepped back to admire her work. "Thank you," Josephine replied, feeling self-conscious but also excited. "You look lovely too." Constance was wearing a deep purple dress that she said she had been saving for special occasions, and she did indeed look elegant and refined. Xavier emerged from his room wearing his best shirt and vest, his boots polished to a shine, and Josephine thought he looked remarkably handsome. The three of them rode to the Peterson ranch in the wagon, with Constance sitting between Xavier and Josephine. The journey took about 45 minutes, and as they drew closer, they could hear music drifting on the evening air. The Peterson barn had been decorated with lanterns and ribbons, and people were already gathering, the women in their finest dresses and the men in clean shirts and slicked-back hair. Josephine felt nervous as they entered the barn, aware of the curious glances directed her way. She was the stranger here, the newcomer, and she could feel people assessing her and wondering who she was. But Constance stayed close, introducing her to various neighbors and explaining that Josephine was their new housekeeper. Everyone was friendly enough, though some of the unmarried young women looked at Josephine with thinly veiled hostility, probably because she was living under the same roof as the eligible Xavier Hawthorne. The dancing started shortly after they arrived, with a local band consisting of a fiddle, a guitar, and a harmonica providing lively music. Xavier dutifully danced the first few dances with some of the neighbor girls, and Josephine tried not to feel jealous as she watched him spin them around the floor. Tom asked her to dance, and then Miguel, and both men were patient with her still developing skills. Then Xavier appeared at her elbow and held out his hand. "May I have this dance, Miss Zeller?" "Of course," Josephine replied, her heart suddenly pounding. He led her onto the floor just as the band struck up a waltz, the same rhythm that Constance had hummed while they practiced. Xavier pulled her into the proper position, and they began to move across the floor. Josephine tried to focus on the steps, but she was overwhelmingly aware of Xavier's hand on her waist, of the solid warmth of his shoulder beneath her other hand, of the way he was looking at her with an expression she could not quite decipher. "You are doing wonderfully," he murmured as they turned in a slow circle. "You are a good teacher," Josephine replied, her voice sounding breathless. They danced in silence for a few moments, moving together in a way that felt natural and right. Josephine forgot about the other people watching them, forgot about her uncertainty and her fears. In that moment, there was only Xavier and the music and the feeling of being held in his arms. "Josephine," Xavier said quietly, using her first name for the first time since they met. "I know you have only been with us for a month, but I need to tell you something." Josephine's heart began to race. "What is it?" "I think I am falling in love with you," Xavier said, his gray eyes intense and serious. "I know that is probably improper of me to say, given that you work for me and you are living under my roof. And I know you might not feel the same way, that you might just see me as your employer and nothing more. But I could not let another day go by without telling you the truth. You have brought light back into this house, into my life. When I found you in Lincoln, lost and alone, I felt this pull, like I was meant to help you, meant to bring you home. And every day since then, I have fallen a little more in love with you. Josephine stopped moving, causing Xavier to halt as well. They stood in the middle of the dance floor while other couples whirled around them, staring at each other while the music swelled and dipped. "Xavier," Josephine whispered, "I feel the same way. I have tried not to, because I did not want to be ungrateful or to complicate things. But I cannot help it. You saved me when I had nothing left, when I had given up. You gave me direction when I was lost. How could I not fall in love with you?" The smile that broke across Xavier's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He pulled her close, closer than was strictly proper for a dance, and they resumed their waltz, but now they were moving as one, perfectly in sync. "I would like to court you properly," Xavier said. "With my mother as chaperone, everything respectable and correct. And if you are agreeable, I would like to ask you to marry me. Not right away, not until you are ready, but someday. I want you by my side, not just as my housekeeper, but as my wife, as my partner in building a life and a future." Tears sprang to Josephine's eyes, but they were happy tears. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it. Yes to courting, yes to marriage, yes to building a life with you. You were my North Star when I was lost, Xavier, and I will gladly follow you anywhere." They finished the dance wrapped up in their own private world, oblivious to the knowing smiles and speculative whispers of the other guests. When the music ended, Xavier reluctantly released her, but he kept her hand clasped in his as they walked off the floor to where Constance was sitting with some of the other older women. One look at their faces told Constance everything she needed to know. "It is about time," she said with satisfaction. "I was wondering how long it would take you two to figure out what was obvious to everyone else." Xavier laughed, and Josephine felt her cheeks heat with a blush, but she could not stop smiling, and neither could Xavier. They spent the rest of the evening dancing together, talking together, stealing moments alone when they could. It was the happiest Josephine had been in longer than she could remember, and judging by the expression on Xavier's face, he felt the same way. The ride home that night was filled with contented silence. Constance dozed between them in the wagon, and Xavier reached across her to hold Josephine's hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. Above them, the stars blazed in the clear night sky, and Josephine thought about how Xavier had offered to be her North Star. Looking up at the vast expanse of glittering lights, she realized that she had found her way home after all. The next few months passed in a golden haze of happiness. Xavier courted Josephine with old-fashioned propriety, always mindful of what was proper and respectful. He brought her wildflowers from the range, taught her to ride well enough that she could accompany him on his rounds of the ranch, and sat with her on the porch in the evenings talking about everything and nothing. They discovered shared interests in books and music, found that they both loved the spectacular sunsets that painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and that they both dreamed of eventually traveling to see the ocean. Constance watched over them with benevolent approval, serving as chaperone but also giving them space to get to know each other better. She taught Josephine more elaborate cooking techniques, shared family recipes that had been passed down through generations, and told her stories about Xavier as a boy, embarrassing tales that made him groan and Josephine laugh. In August, with the summer heat at its peak, but the promise of autumn in the air, Xavier proposed officially. He did it at sunset, taking Josephine to a high point on the ranch where they could see for miles in every direction. The land stretched out before them in shades of gold and green, with the mountains rising majestically in the distance and the sky painted in brilliant colors. "Josephine Zeller," Xavier said, dropping to one knee and pulling a small box from his pocket. "You came into my life when I was not looking for anyone, but you turned out to be everything I did not know I needed. You are brave and strong and kind. You work hard, you care deeply, and you make me want to be a better man. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond, nothing ostentatious but beautiful in its simplicity. Josephine looked from the ring to Xavier's earnest face, seeing nothing but love and hope in his gray eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and sure. "Yes, I will marry you, Xavier Hawthorne. I will stand by your side, work beside you, build a life with you. You gave me direction when I was lost, gave me hope when I had none. I love you with all my heart." Xavier slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that had been restrained for months, but now could finally be expressed. Josephine kissed him back, pouring all her love and gratitude and joy into that kiss, feeling his arms strong and sure around her. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and flushed, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I am the luckiest man alive," he murmured. "No," Josephine replied with a smile. "I am the lucky one. I was lost and you found me. I had no direction and you gave me purpose. I was alone and you gave me a family." They stood there as the sun sank below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear, holding each other and talking quietly about their future. They decided to have a simple wedding in the fall, after the busy summer season was over. They would marry in Lincoln at the small church there, with just close friends and neighbors in attendance. Then they would return to the ranch and continue building the life they had already begun together. The wedding took place on a crisp October afternoon, with leaves turning gold in the cottonwoods along the river. Josephine wore a new dress of ivory silk that Constance had helped her sew, simple but elegant, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Xavier wore a new suit that made him look handsome and just slightly uncomfortable, though his smile when he saw Josephine walking down the aisle toward him was genuine and filled with such love that it made several of the women in attendance dab at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Tom and Miguel stood up as witnesses, both men cleaned up and looking proud to be part of the ceremony. Constance sat in the front pew, beaming with happiness and occasionally sniffling into her own handkerchief. The ceremony was simple and brief, but the words they spoke were heartfelt and meaningful. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and told Xavier he could kiss his bride, Xavier did so with enthusiasm that made the small gathering laugh and applaud. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food contributed by various neighbors. There was roasted beef and chicken, fresh bread and vegetables from gardens, pies and cakes of every variety. Someone had brought a keg of beer, and there was lemonade for those who preferred it. The same band from the barn dance played music, and people danced on a wooden platform that Tom and Miguel had constructed for the occasion. Josephine felt like she was floating through a dream, accepting congratulations and good wishes from people who had become friends over the past months. She danced with Xavier, with Tom, with Miguel, and even with some of the older ranchers who came to pay their respects. But always she came back to Xavier, drawn to his side like a magnet, their eyes meeting across the yard and sharing private smiles. As evening fell and the guests began to depart, Josephine found herself alone with Xavier on the porch, watching the last of the wagons disappear down the road toward town. Constance had tactfully retired to her room early, giving the newlyweds their privacy. The ranch hands had gone to the bunkhouse, and the ranch was quiet except for the gentle sounds of night settling over the land. "Hello, Mrs. Hawthorne," Xavier said softly, taking her hand. "Hello, Mr. Hawthorne," Josephine replied, loving the sound of her new name. Xavier led her inside to the room that had been his, but was now theirs, a space that had been cleaned and prepared for their first night as husband and wife. Someone, probably Constance, had placed fresh flowers on the dresser and turned down the bed. A lamp burned low, casting warm, golden light across the room. Josephine felt suddenly nervous, aware that they were crossing a threshold into a new phase of their relationship. But Xavier seemed to sense her anxiety. He took both her hands in his and looked into her eyes. "We have all the time in the world," he said gently. "There is no rush, no pressure. I just want you to be happy, to feel safe and loved. That is all that matters to me." His words eased her nerves, reminding her that this was Xavier, the man who had found her when she was lost, who had offered her direction when she had none, who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect since the day they met. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the slight roughness of stubble beneath her fingers. "I love you," she said simply. "I am happy. I am home." Xavier smiled and kissed her, and in the gentle intimacy that followed, Josephine understood that she had finally found where she belonged. Not just a place, but a person. Not just a roof over her head, but a partner to share her life with. All the months of wandering, all the pain and loss and fear, had led her to this moment, to this man, to this life. The years that followed were good ones, filled with hard work but also with joy and love. Josephine threw herself into ranch life, learning not just household skills but also how to work with the cattle and horses. She became an accomplished rider, often accompanying Xavier on his rounds of the ranch. She learned to rope and brand, to doctor sick animals, to read the weather and the land. Their first child, a son they named William after Xavier's father, was born in the summer of 1880, just as the territory was beginning to settle down after years of range wars and conflicts. Josephine had never imagined herself as a mother, but she found she had a natural aptitude for it, just as she had for so many other things. William was a healthy, happy baby with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determination. Constance doted on her grandson, declaring him the most beautiful baby ever born. She helped Josephine navigate the challenges of new motherhood, offering advice and support while never being overbearing. The three generations lived together in harmony, each contributing to the household in their own way. Tom and Miguel became like family as well, serving as honorary uncles to young William and continuing their loyal service to the ranch. The ranch itself prospered as Xavier's hard work and good management paid off. They paid off the bank loan ahead of schedule, expanded the herd, and gained a reputation for producing quality horses. In 1882, a daughter arrived, named Constance after her grandmother. She was a tiny, delicate thing with blonde curls and blue eyes like her mother. Young William was fascinated by his little sister, constantly wanting to help care for her and making his parents laugh with his serious attempts to be a good big brother. The older Constance's health began to decline slowly as the years passed. Her arthritis grew worse, confining her more and more to the house. But she remained sharp and engaged, reading to her grandchildren and teaching them their letters and numbers. She died peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1885, with Xavier and Josephine at her bedside, having lived long enough to see her son happy and her grandchildren thriving. They buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch, next to Xavier's father, with a simple stone marker that bore her name and the dates of her birth and death. Josephine grieved for the woman who had welcomed her so warmly into the family, who had treated her not as a servant but as a daughter, who had helped her find her place in this new life. But life went on, as it always does. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Xavier and Josephine added more rooms to the house as their family expanded. A third child, another son named Thomas after faithful Tom, arrived in 1886. Tom himself had passed away the previous year, finally retiring and succumbing to a sudden heart attack in his sleep at the age of 62. They hired a new hand to replace him, a young man named Jack who proved to be hardworking and reliable. The children grew strong and healthy, learning to ride almost before they could walk, running wild across the ranch lands under the vast New Mexico sky. William showed signs of being a natural rancher like his father, already displaying leadership qualities and a way with animals. Little Constance was quieter, more bookish, but equally determined in her own way. Thomas was still too young to show much personality beyond an infectious laugh and an ability to charm everyone he met. In the evenings, when the work was done and the children were in bed, Xavier and Josephine would sit on the porch and watch the sun set, talking about their day and their plans for the future. They spoke of expanding the ranch further, perhaps eventually passing it on to William when he was old enough. They talked about saving money to send the children to school, maybe even back east if they showed the aptitude and desire for higher education. "You ever think about how we met?" Xavier asked one evening, his arm around Josephine's shoulders as they rocked gently in the porch swing he had built. "All the time," Josephine admitted. "I think about how lost I was, how hopeless everything seemed. And then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I had not even known how to pray." "I knew from the moment I saw you that you were important," Xavier said. "I could not explain it then, did not understand it. But I felt pulled toward you, like I was meant to help you, meant to bring you here." "You said you would be my North Star," Josephine remembered, leaning her head against his shoulder. "That I should follow you home, and I did, and I found everything I needed, not just a home but a family, a purpose, a life worth living." "We found each other," Xavier corrected gently. "I was not looking for love, was not even thinking about marriage. I was content with my ranch and my mother and my simple life. But you changed everything. You brought joy and laughter and love. You gave me children and a future. You made the house a home." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch at rest. In the distance, a coyote howled at the rising moon and the horses in the corral moved peacefully in their sleep. "I love this life we have built," Josephine said finally. "Every single day I am grateful for what we have, for what you gave me when I had nothing." "We gave each other something," Xavier replied. "I gave you direction, but you gave me purpose. I had the ranch, but without someone to share it with, it was just land and cattle and work. You made it mean something. You made everything mean something." More years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of the children. William grew into a tall, strong young man who could work alongside his father from dawn to dusk without complaint. Constance, who they called Connie to distinguish her from her late grandmother, developed into an intelligent young woman who loved books and learning. Thomas became the ranch's unofficial entertainer, always ready with a joke or a song, but also a hard worker when the situation demanded it. In 1892, another child arrived unexpectedly, a little girl they named Josephine after her mother but called Joy for short. She was a surprise blessing, coming when Josephine thought her childbearing years were behind her. Joy lived up to her nickname, a sunny, happy child who brought laughter wherever she went. Miguel eventually left the ranch to start his own small spread nearby, but he remained a close friend and frequent visitor. Jack stayed on and proved himself invaluable, eventually becoming the ranch foreman when the workload grew too large for Xavier to manage alone. They hired additional hands as needed, and the ranch that had once been a modest operation grew into one of the most successful in the territory. The territory itself changed as well. In 1912, New Mexico finally became a state, and the wild, untamed land that Xavier and Josephine had known was slowly being civilized. Roads improved, telegraph lines spread, and eventually even telephone service reached the remote ranches. The Old West was passing into history, becoming the stuff of dime novels and nostalgic memories. But some things remained constant. The love between Xavier and Josephine never wavered, never diminished. If anything, it grew deeper and richer with the passing years, seasoned by shared experiences and mutual respect. They were partners in the truest sense, working together, making decisions together, supporting each other through triumphs and tragedies. William married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread and took over more and more of the ranch's operations as Xavier aged. Connie became a teacher, fulfilling her grandmother's legacy of education, though she remained close to the family and visited often. Thomas eventually went east to Denver, where he opened a successful mercantile business, but he too returned frequently for holidays and special occasions. Joy, the youngest, stayed closest to home, marrying a local rancher and settling on land adjacent to the family ranch. Xavier and Josephine watched their grandchildren arrive and grow, taking pride in each new generation while also feeling the weight of years beginning to press down upon them. Xavier's dark hair turned silver, then white, and his strong body began to show the wear of decades of hard physical labor. Josephine's face lined with wrinkles, each one a map of laughter and tears and years lived fully. They celebrated their 30th anniversary with a party that brought together family and friends from across the region. It was held at the ranch, now expanded and modernized but still recognizably the same place where Josephine had first found sanctuary so many years before. As they danced together under strings of electric lights, a modern marvel that would have seemed like magic back in 1878, Josephine reflected on the incredible journey they had taken together. "You ever regret it?" Xavier asked as they swayed to the music. "Saying yes to a stranger who offered to bring you home." Josephine looked up into his face, still handsome despite the marks of age, and smiled. "Not for one single second. You were my North Star, Xavier. You guided me home when I was lost. And every day since then, you have continued to be my light, my guide, my love." "I fell in love with you before I even knew your name," Xavier confessed. "Standing in that dusty street in Lincoln, watching you look so lost and alone, I knew I had to help you. And then I got to know you and I fell even deeper. You have been the love of my life, Josephine Hawthorne. My partner, my best friend, the mother of my children, the heart of my home." They kissed, unbothered by the cheers and applause from their family and friends. They had never been shy about showing affection, and age had not changed that. If anything, they were more comfortable with each other now than ever, secure in a love that had been tested by time and found unbreakable. The years continued to roll by, bringing with them the inevitable challenges of aging. Xavier's joints ached on cold mornings, and he could no longer ride for hours the way he once had. Josephine's hands, which had been so capable and strong, began to show the same arthritis that had plagued her mother-in-law. But they adapted, delegating more tasks to their children and hired help, focusing on enjoying each day rather than worrying about what they could no longer do. They took to spending long hours on the porch, that same porch where so much of their life together had unfolded. They would sit in their rocking chairs, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in companionable silence, watching the life of the ranch continue around them. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren came to visit, and Xavier would tell them stories of the old days, of cattle drives and wild horses, of the time when New Mexico was still a territory, and the land was rough and untamed. Josephine would add her own stories, about the journey west with her father, about arriving in Lincoln with nothing and no one, about the kind cowboy who offered to be her North Star. The children, growing up in a modern world of automobiles and airplanes, found these tales exotic and fascinating, windows into a past that seemed impossibly distant. In the fall of 1920, Xavier fell ill with pneumonia. Despite the best efforts of the doctor who came from Lincoln, now easily accessible by automobile rather than wagon, he could not seem to shake the sickness. He grew weaker as the weeks passed, spending more and more time in bed, with Josephine constantly at his side. On a crisp November evening, with the first snow of winter falling gently outside the window, Xavier called his family to his bedside. William and Connie and Thomas and Joy all came, along with Miguel, who was now an old man himself, and various grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The room was crowded but quiet, everyone sensing that this might be their final chance to say goodbye to the patriarch of the family. Xavier looked at each of them in turn, offering words of love and advice. He told William he was proud of the man he had become and trusted him to continue the ranch's legacy. He told Connie that her grandmother would have been proud of her dedication to education. He told Thomas that his entrepreneurial spirit had served him well. He told Joy that she had lived up to her name every single day of her life. Then he turned to Miguel. "You have been like a brother to me," Xavier said, his voice weak but clear. "Thank you for your loyalty, your friendship, and your support all these years." Miguel, tears streaming down his weathered face, could only nod and clasp Xavier's hand tightly. Finally, Xavier looked at Josephine, who sat beside him on the bed, holding his other hand. "My North Star," he whispered. "My beautiful, strong, amazing wife. You have given me the best years of my life. Everything good that I became, everything worthwhile that I did was because of you." "No," Josephine said, her own tears falling freely. "You saved me, Xavier. You gave me everything. Direction when I was lost, hope when I had none, love when I thought I would never find it. I would not have had any of this without you." "We saved each other," Xavier said with a slight smile. "That is how love works, I think. We were two lost souls who found each other exactly when we needed to. And we built something beautiful together." He reached up with his free hand and touched her face, his fingers trembling slightly. "I am not afraid, Josephine. I have lived a good life, a full life. I have loved and been loved. I have children and grandchildren who will carry on after I am gone. I have built something lasting, and I have spent every day of the past 42 years with the woman I love. A man could not ask for more." "Do not leave me," Josephine whispered, knowing even as she said it that it was a futile request. "I will never leave you," Xavier replied. "I will be waiting for you wherever we go next. And until then, I will be in every sunset you watch from our porch, in every breeze that crosses the ranch, in the faces of our children and their children. I will always be with you, my love. Always." He closed his eyes then, his breathing growing shallow. The family gathered closer, and Josephine lay down beside him on the bed, as she had done for so many thousands of nights, her head on his shoulder and her arm across his chest. She felt his heartbeat, once strong and steady, now weak and irregular. She felt his breath stirring her hair, growing fainter with each passing moment. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you so much, Xavier Hawthorne. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for everything." Xavier's lips moved, forming words that only she could hear. Love you. Forever. And then, peacefully, with his family surrounding him and his beloved wife in his arms, Xavier Hawthorne drew his last breath. The room was silent except for quiet weeping, as everyone absorbed the loss of this man who had meant so much to so many. Josephine lay still for a long time, not ready to let go, not ready to accept that the great love of her life was gone. But finally, gently, William helped her sit up and they began the process of saying goodbye. They buried Xavier on the hill next to his parents, overlooking the ranch that had been his life's work. The funeral was large, attended by people from all over the region who had known and respected him. The new minister, young and earnest, spoke about Xavier's integrity, his kindness, his dedication to family and community. But it was Josephine who gave the most touching tribute. Standing at the graveside, leaning on William's arm for support, she spoke about the day they met, about the lost girl with no direction and the cowboy who offered to be her North Star. She spoke about the life they had built together, the love they had shared, the family they had created. She spoke about partnership and respect, about working side by side through good times and bad, about the kind of love that deepens and strengthens rather than fading with time. "He saved me," she said in conclusion, her voice strong despite her tears. "But more than that, he showed me what it means to love and be loved. He gave me direction, gave me purpose, gave me everything that matters. And now he is gone, but the legacy he left behind lives on in all of us, in this ranch, in these children and grandchildren." Xavier Hawthorne was the finest man I ever knew, and I will love him until my dying breath and beyond. The months after Xavier's death were hard for Josephine. She had lost her partner, her best friend, her reason for getting up in the morning. The ranch continued to operate under William's capable management, and her children tried to comfort and support her, but nothing could fill the void that Xavier's absence had created. She spent long hours on the porch, sitting in her rocking chair with Xavier's empty chair beside her, remembering. She would close her eyes and feel his presence, hear his voice in the wind, see his smile in the faces of their descendants. She knew he would not want her to spend her remaining days in grief, but it was hard to find joy in a world that no longer held him. Slowly, gradually, she began to heal. Not to forget or to stop missing him, but to find a way to live with the loss. She threw herself into her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, taking pleasure in watching them grow and thrive. She helped William's wife with the household management, teaching the younger woman all the skills that Constance Hawthorne had once taught her. She worked in the garden, that same garden she had tended for over 40 years, finding solace in the familiar rhythms of planting and harvesting. On the second anniversary of Xavier's death, Josephine walked up the hill to his grave carrying a bouquet of wildflowers. She sat down on the grass beside the headstone, running her fingers over the carved letters of his name. "Hello, my love," she said softly. "I hope you do not mind me talking to you like this. The children think I am a bit crazy, but I feel closer to you here." She arranged the flowers in the vase that was permanently affixed to the headstone and then settled back, looking out over the ranch that spread below. From this vantage point, she could see the house, expanded and modernized but still fundamentally the same structure where she had first found sanctuary. She could see the barn and the corrals, the outbuildings and the garden. She could see cattle grazing in the distance and horses moving peacefully in their pasture. "We built something good," she said to Xavier's grave. "Something lasting. The ranch is thriving under William. He has your gift for management, your way with animals and people. Connie has become an excellent teacher, respected throughout the state. Thomas has been so successful in Denver that he is thinking about opening additional stores. And Joy, our little surprise blessing, is raising a beautiful family of her own. She paused, plucking at the grass with her fingers. I miss you every single day. Every sunrise that I watch alone, every decision I make without your input, every meal I eat at a table that feels too empty without you at the head of it. But I am still here, still living, because I know that is what you would want. And because our story, the one that started in Lincoln when you found me lost and alone, that story continues in all these children and grandchildren. We live on through them. The wind picked up, rustling through the grass and the nearby trees, and Josephine imagined she could hear Xavier's voice in it, telling her he was proud, telling her he loved her, telling her to keep going. She visited the grave regularly after that, always bringing flowers, always talking to Xavier about the family and the ranch and her life. It comforted her, this ritual, made her feel less alone. Josephine lived for another 8 years after Xavier's death, staying active and engaged with the family until near the very end. She died peacefully in her sleep in the summer of 1928, at the age of 70, surrounded by photographs of her husband and children and a life well lived. They buried her beside Xavier on the hill, with a headstone that matched his. The family gathered once again, now even larger with yet another generation, to say goodbye to the matriarch of the clan. William, now an old man himself with gray in his hair and lines on his face, spoke about his mother with love and respect. She was the strongest woman I ever knew, he said, looking out at the assembled family. She came to this ranch with nothing, lost and alone, and she built a life here through sheer determination and love. She taught us about resilience, about the importance of family, about working hard and loving fiercely. And she showed us, every single day, what a true partnership looks like. The love between my parents was something special, something rare. They were equals in every way, partners in building not just a ranch but a legacy. As they lowered Josephine's casket into the ground beside Xavier's, the sun broke through the clouds, sending golden light streaming across the ranch. And everyone present felt in that moment that Xavier and Josephine were together again, reunited in whatever comes after this life, their love story finally complete. The ranch continued to thrive for generations after, passed down from William to his children, and then to theirs. The story of Xavier and Josephine became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The story of the lost girl with no direction and the cowboy who offered to be her North Star, who said, "Follow me home," and changed both their lives forever. On the hill overlooking the ranch, their graves stood side by side, the headstones weathering but remaining legible, marking the final resting place of two people who found each other when they needed it most and built something beautiful together. And every year, on the anniversary of the day they met, someone from the family would climb that hill and place fresh flowers on both graves, ensuring that their love story would never be forgotten. The land that Xavier and Josephine had worked so hard to build up remained in the family, a testament to their vision and dedication. The house, though modernized with each passing generation, retained the bones of the original structure where so much love and laughter had echoed through the years. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, people swore they could hear the sound of Constance humming a waltz, or smell the wildflowers that Josephine loved so much, or feel the presence of the man and woman who had started it all. Their love story became a beacon for the family, proof that sometimes the most broken people can find healing in each other, that direction can come from the most unexpected places, and that home is not just a location but a person, a feeling, a choice to build something lasting with someone you love. Xavier and Josephine Hawthorne had lived their North Star love story fully, leaving behind not just property and possessions, but a legacy of love, partnership, and family that would endure for generations to come.